The bell above the door of Recon Arms rang at 9:17 a.m. on a Saturday. Nobody looked up right away. That was just how Saturday mornings worked in Fort Davis, Texas. Country music drifting from the corner speaker, the overlapping smells of gun oil and drip coffee. A dozen men scattered between the long glass cases and the rifle racks lining every wall. The kind of place where everyone had something to prove, and everyone thought they were the most qualified person in the room. Brick Tillman was leaning against the far end of the main counter, telling Floyd Haskell about his groupings from the previous weekend. He stretched his arms to show the spread. Floyd nodded like a man who had heard this story before but would never say so. Then the bell rang, and Brick looked up. The woman standing in the doorway was wearing scrubs, the pale blue kind that hospitals issued by the truckload, still creased from a long night shift. The name stitched above her left breast pocket read D. Carson, R.N. She was small, not frail, just compact, with her dark hair pulled back fast, the kind of ponytail you tied when you had 3 minutes before clocking out. In both hands, she held nothing but a folded square of paper. Brick's eyes moved to Floyd. Floyd's mouth twitched at the corner. "Help you with something?" Brick called across the floor. He used the particular tone that longtime gun shop employees develop for certain kinds of walk-ins, not rude enough to cause a scene, just weighted enough to communicate that the person had wandered into the wrong place. Dahlia Carson crossed the floor without rushing. She reached the main counter, unfolded the paper, and set it flat on top of the glass case. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes went straight to Brick and stayed there, calm, direct, and entirely without deference. "I need guidance on a semi-automatic long-range rifle," she said. "Specifically, the ballistic difference between .308 Winchester and .338 Lapua Magnum at distances beyond 800 meters." The words landed in the air and just hung there. 2 full seconds passed. Then Brick laughed. Not a polite laugh, not even an uncomfortable one. The kind of laugh a man produces when he wants to make sure everyone nearby catches that something ridiculous just happened. "Come again?" He turned slightly, making eye contact with Floyd, then with 2 men at the far case who had both looked over. "Sweetheart, this isn't a pharmacy. We're fresh out of the little paper cups." Floyd chuckled. Jasper Walsh, the younger employee stocking shelves at the back counter, dipped his head and went very still. The practiced stillness of someone who didn't want to be seen laughing, but couldn't stop the movement in his shoulders. Dahlia's gaze didn't follow Brick when he turned to perform for the room. She looked back down at her paper, the way a person looks at a document when they're waiting for a meeting to begin. Not nervous, not offended, just waiting. "308 Winchester," she said, as if the laugh had not happened. "Or 338 Lapua, 800 meters, 12-kilometer crosswind." Brick set both palms flat on the counter and leaned forward. The grin was still there, but something had shifted underneath it. Not respect, not yet. Just the friction of a man who expected a reaction and didn't get one. "Okay," he said. "I'll bite. What's the rifle for? Gift for a boyfriend? We've got some nice compact options in the back. Pink options, too, if that's more your—" "It's for a family member," Dahlia said. "I'd like accurate information, please." The please landed without softness. It was not a request for kindness. It was a statement of what she expected. Before we go any further, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever walked into a room and been dismissed before you even opened your mouth, hit that like button right now. Because what Dahlia Carson does next is for every single person who is ever told they don't belong. Subscribe if you're new, because this channel tells the stories they never put in the headlines. And trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming in the next 10 minutes. Recon Arms had a particular feel on weekend mornings. The walls were dressed with purpose. Framed unit patches, a mounted rack of Vietnam-era rifles behind plexiglass, 2 American flags hung on opposing ends of the main floor. A handwritten sign near the entrance read, "22 years serving Fort Davis. We speak the language." Regular customers moved through the space like they owned part of it. And in a way they did. This was their third place, after home and the diner 2 blocks over, and they treated it accordingly. There were 14 people in the store that Saturday morning. Deputy Derek Morales was parked near the handgun case in his county uniform, one thumb hooked into his duty belt, nursing a cup of the free coffee that Silas Calloway put out every weekend without fail. Ezra McBride, retired Army Ranger, 2 combat tours, the kind of man who still carried himself like he was about to step into a briefing, sat alone at the small table by the window, working through a mug and not talking to anyone. Fern Pierce, 63 years old, and the only employee of Recon Arms who had been there longer than Brick, stood behind the register doing inventory with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had seen everything twice. Fern was the first one in the building who smiled when Dahlia walked in. Brick wasn't finished. He had a rhythm going now, and the room was watching. Family member, he repeated, savoring the words. So we're talking what? A husband who asked you to come pick something out? Because no offense, but a 338 Lapua conversation isn't usually a starter question. That's like walking into a surgical supply store and asking about scalpel metallurgy. Then you've been in some interesting supply stores, Dahlia said. Floyd laughed for real that time. Caught himself. Straightened. Brick's jaw tightened. He recovered quickly, gesturing toward the long wall of semi-automatic rifles behind him. Tell you what, let me show you some options that might be more accessible. We've got a very reliable AR platform setup, easy manual of arms, nice and straightforward. He reached back and pulled an AR-15 from the rack, setting it on the counter with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Dahlia looked at the rifle. Then she reached out and placed her right hand on the receiver. It was a small thing. Nobody in the store would have named it if you asked them to describe what happened next. But Fern Pierce, standing 20 feet away with a clipboard, tilted her head. Because the way Dahlia Carson's hand found that weapon was not the way a first-time buyer touches a firearm. Her index finger was flat and straight along the frame before her palm even made contact with the stock, not positioned near the trigger, not hesitating. The finger discipline was automatic, the kind that takes 1,000 repetitions to make unconscious. Fern set the clipboard down slowly. Floyd was talking. Something about caliber, about how the AR platform was a natural progression point, about how he'd personally put over 3,000 rounds through his and it had never jammed once. Dahlia was not listening to him. She was looking at the rifle with the focused, evaluative stillness of someone running a silent checklist. Magazine, she said. Floyd blinked. Sorry? Is there a magazine seated in this? No, it's empty. Obviously, we don't. Then it's not demonstrating the full manual of arms. She picked the rifle up with both hands, checking the chamber, running the bolt back with a click that was cleaner and faster than anything Brick would have expected. She checked the ejection port, angled it to catch the light, and set it back down. What's your supplier on the uppers? The question had no hostile edge. It was simply a question. But it belonged to a different conversation than the one Brick thought they were having. Our supplier is... Floyd paused. He looked at Brick. Brick stepped in. We source from 3 manufacturers, all quality. But I don't think the supplier chain is really what you need to be focused on right now. You're right, Dahlia said. I'm focused on the 338 Lapua question. From the table by the window, Ezra McBride set down his coffee. He didn't say anything. But he was watching now, with the particular quality of attention that a man gives to something he can't quite categorize. Jasper Walsh chose this moment to insert himself. He was 26, had been at Recon Arms for 18 months, and had developed the habit of using technical vocabulary to deflect from the fact that he still deferred to Brick on everything. He carried a detached scope to the counter and set it down. Since we're talking precision shooting, he said, with the magnanimous air of someone doing a favor, maybe we start with optics education. Explain what this is used for. He placed the scope on the counter. He had mounted it backwards. It was subtle, barely perceptible. The kind of deliberate wrongness that was deniable. Oh, I must have set it down that way without thinking. But pointed. A test. See if she notices. Dahlia looked at it. 1 second. Then she reached out, rotated the scope 180 degrees, and set it back down. She did not comment. She did not look at Jasper. She simply corrected it, the way you correct a misaligned pen on a desk, and returned her attention to the counter. The silence that followed had texture. Anyone can learn to handle equipment, Brick said. He said it too quickly. Doesn't mean you know why you're using it. The 338 Lapua Magnum, Dahlia said, for the 3rd time, carries approximately 725 grains per bullet in common match-grade rounds. At 800 meters in a 12-kilometer crosswind, right-to-left quarter wind at a standard 45-degree angle, The lateral drift differential between 308 and 338 is approximately 17 inches. The heavier projectile manages that crosswind correction significantly better. She said it the way someone says the time when asked. No performance, no emphasis, just information, delivered at conversational volume, as if the numbers were obvious. Floyd had stopped moving. He was holding an ammunition box he'd picked up 30 seconds earlier, and he was still holding it, but he was no longer doing anything with it. Deputy Derek Morales, from a spot near the handgun case, straightened, almost imperceptibly. Wikipedia, Rick said. He said it loud enough for the room. He was smiling again, but the architecture of the smile was different now. You can Google ballistics tables all day long. That doesn't make you a shooter. Dahlia said nothing. She looked at her paper. It was at this point that the door opened again. The young man who walked in was 17, wearing a gray hoodie that had been through too many wash cycles, carrying the particular combination of awkward energy and trying not to show it that boys carry when they're on the edge of something large. He saw Dahlia and started across the floor toward her. Chill, he caught himself. Dahlia. Brick looked at him, then back at Dahlia. Floyd leaned slightly over and said something very quietly into Brick's ear, and Brick began to nod. The slow, satisfied nod of a man who thinks he's just understood the whole picture. The boy wanted the rifle. The sister came along to seem knowledgeable. The confident questions were performance. Mystery solved. That your brother? Brick asked. Dahlia looked up. She did not answer Brick. She raised one hand, palm open, toward the teenager. A gesture so small and so absolutely clear that the young man stopped midstream, redirected, and went and sat down in the chair 20 yards away. No question, no protest. He just sat. Fern Pierce, watching from the register, looked at her quickly and put it in her time. Brick interpreted what he just said as a signal. Older sister, protected, had briefly kicked him. He filed it away in a comfortable explanation of the movement. He did not consider what it meant when the 17-year-old responded to a single hand gesture with the precision of a well-understood instruction. Right, Brick said. He paused. Look, I get it. Kids going into the military, they're doing their research. That's admirable. But there's a difference between writing out long-range calibers and actually knowing what you're talking about. He gestured into the store. These guys here, most of them have field experience. Some of them have combat experience. They were all right to walk in here and talk ballistics. You walked in here 20 minutes ago in scrubs. Several of the regulars were watching. Two of them were almost smiling. Dahlia looked at Rick, just looked at him. Has the MK-14 EBR come back into stock? She asked Fern. Fern startled slightly. We have one, yes. It's in the back case. Could I see it? Fern looked at Brick. Brick, after a beat, nodded. The nod of a man who had decided to let the world run. Jasper retrieved the Mag 14 enhanced battle rifle from the back case and brought it to the counter. It was a designated marksman rifle, semi-automatic, originally developed for special operations use. Not a weapon that showed up in casual Saturday morning browsing. Jasper set it on the front rack. What Jasper knew, and no one else in the room knew, was that the rifle had a component missing from the gas system. He'd removed it himself 10 minutes before Dahlia walked in. Not from any mean-spirited place, he told himself, just to see. Dahlia picked up the Mach 14. She did not chamber check it first this time. She knew this was a display weapon. Instead, she turned it slowly, examining the gas system with the unhurried focus of a mechanic reading an engine. 3 seconds. 4. She set it down. Gas piston cup is missing, she said. Jasper went very still. Floyd turned to look at the weapon. Even Brick leaned forward. There was a small, specific silence that comes when someone names the exact thing no one expected them to name. We had it in for service, Jasper said. The cup needs to be indexed before the rifle comes back to the floor, Dahlia said. If someone racks this without knowing the piston's incomplete, they're going to feel it. She said this the way she said everything, without drama, without a glance around to see who was listening. The information was for the room, not for anyone's benefit. She had noticed something that needed to be said, so she said it. Floyd put down the ammunition box. From the far side of the store, Ezra McBride stood up. He walked slowly toward the counter, not in any threatening way, just the deliberate movement of someone who wanted a closer look at something. He stopped at the edge of the group, studying Dahlia. "You look familiar," Ezra said. His voice was careful. "Do you work at Fort Davis Regional?" Dahlia glanced at him. "ICU nights." "You were on shift when my wife came in," Ezra said. "Last November, cardiac episode, a quiet beat. I remember that night." "She's fine now," Ezra said, "because of what you did." There was something in his eyes as he said it that went a fraction past gratitude, a slight narrowing, the look of a man filing something in a folder he's not sure how to label yet. But Brick seized on the exchange like a lifeline. "There you go," Brick said, gesturing between them with an open hand. "Great nurse, saved a life. That's real skill, and it matters. But this—" He spread his arms to indicate the walls of the store, the rifles, the whole world of recon arms. "This is a different skill set, and there's no shame in not having it." He said it with the generosity of a man granting absolution, the perfect patronizing landing. "Brick," Fern said it quietly, not looking up from what she'd returned to doing with her clipboard. Brick ignored her. He was leaning into it now. "Why don't we get your brother over here? Set him up with something appropriate, and we can have a real conversation about what he actually needs." "Floyd," Dahlia said. Floyd blinked. She'd used his name without being introduced to him. He didn't catch that immediately, but it registered somewhere. "You told the gentleman at the far case that the 338 Lapua wasn't necessary below 1,000 meters, she said, "that it was a waste of money." Floyd straightened. "That's a fair general. It depends entirely on the mission profile," she said. "For target acquisition beyond 800 meters in variable wind, which is standard in high-altitude terrain engagements. The 338 outperforms the 308 on retained velocity and wind resistance by a margin that isn't academic. It's the difference between a first-round hit and a second shot that gives away your position. The word position sat in the air. Your position. Not the shooter's position, not the operator's position. Your position. The phrasing of someone who had been in one. Ezra McBride heard it. He picked up his coffee cup, looked into it, set it back down. Brick heard it too. He chose not to examine it. "You know what? I'm going to get our store manager." "Your store manager is Silas Calloway," Dahlia said. "He's in the back office. He was a master sergeant, MARSOC, active from 1990 to 2012. He can answer my question about the 338 if you'd prefer." Every person in Recon Arms who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. Brick's expression went through several stages very quickly. "How do you know who Silas is?" "It's on the wall," Dahlia said. She wasn't wrong. A framed photograph hung near the back hallway. Silas Calloway in uniform, younger, with a unit patch and a citation beneath it. It had been there for 11 years. Most people who came into the store never read it. Dahlia had read it in the 30 seconds she'd stood by the door when she first walked in. Brick recalibrated. He glanced at Floyd, who gave a small, nearly invisible shrug. The two of them retreated slightly, not physically, but strategically. Deputy Morales had moved from the handgun case and was now standing closer to the main counter, and he had his phone out, though he wasn't looking at it in any casual way. "I need to step away for 1 minute," Derek said to no one in particular. He walked to the small computer terminal that Recon Arms used for background check processing and began typing. His movements were deliberate, and he was not subtle about what he was doing. He was running her name. D. Carson. The result came back in under 45 seconds. Derek read it once. Read it again. His face did not change in any obvious way, but he turned slightly away from the counter, as if to think. The screen said, "Record sealed. Federal jurisdiction. Access restricted. Contact Department of Defense for further information." Derek turned the thought over. Federal seal on a civilian nurse from a regional hospital. He glanced across the floor at Brick and made the small sideways tilt of the head that meant later. Brick caught it and nodded. "We're at the halfway point, and I need to pause right here. Because what's about to happen inside Recon Arms is the moment this entire story has been building toward. If this video has you holding your breath, share it with someone who needs to see it today. Every share helps this channel keep bringing you stories like Dahlia's. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, turn on notifications, and stay locked in, because Silas Calloway just walked out of his back office, and nothing in that room will ever be the same. Brick had a new theory now, and he wore it the way comfortable men wear new theories, as confirmation rather than question. A sealed federal record for a nurse most likely meant malpractice litigation, institutional protection, something administrative. He'd known a guy whose cousin had a sealed record from a civil case. That's how these things worked. He walked back to the counter with renewed ease. "Tell you what," he said. "Let's try something different." He reached under the counter and produced a rifle cleaning kit, then pulled a partially field-stripped M4 carbine from the service shelf, a store demo used for maintenance tutorials. He laid the components out on the felt mat with practiced precision. Upper receiver, lower receiver, bolt carrier group, charging handle, buffer and spring, each part separated. Waiting. "Reassemble it," he said. "Full manual of arms. If you can do it clean, I'll personally answer every question you walked in with, and we'll waive the consultation fee." Floyd crossed his arms. "Fair deal." Jasper watched from the back counter. He already knew what the answer would be. Most people who came in for this kind of demo needed guidance through at least 3 steps. Dahlia looked at the components. She stood quietly for a moment, and in that moment she was utterly still. Not hesitant, not calculating, just present. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong to anxiety. Then she moved. Her hands found the buffer and spring first. She seated them without looking at the lower receiver, oriented by touch alone. A small thing, nearly invisible. But Fern was watching, and Fern put her hand flat on the countertop. Lower and upper came together next. The charging handle indexed cleanly. Bolt carrier group seated with a particular practiced confidence. Not shoved, not tentative, but settled with the minimal force of someone who had learned exactly how much was needed and never wasted more. She ran the charging handle back and released it. The click was sharp, clean, perfect. Magazine check. Dust cover. Safe. She set the rifle on the mat and stepped back. The clock on the wall read 9:43 a.m. Fern turned to the small notepad she kept near the register and wrote something down. A time. 1 minute, 43 seconds. The store had gone quiet in a way that was different from earlier quiet. Earlier quiet had been the polite silence of bystanders watching someone get embarrassed. This was the silence of people who were not sure what they had just seen. Brick stared at the assembled M4. He looked at Floyd. Floyd said nothing. For once, Floyd had nothing to contribute. "I've seen veterans take 5 times that long," Ezra said from the edge of the group. He said it very quietly. He was not talking to anyone in particular. Brick leaned on the counter. "Muscle memory," he said. "You can learn to do that from YouTube channels. Assembly drills are all over the internet." He said it without looking at anyone. "Doesn't tell me anything." "What would tell you something?" Dahlia asked. The question was direct, not challenging in any aggressive sense. She genuinely wanted to know the answer. Brick registered this as another kind of confidence, the kind that didn't need to press, and it made him more uncomfortable than the assembly had. "Jasper," he said, "bring out that Night Force scope, the NX8. Jasper retrieved the scope from the display case, a professional-grade optic, the kind used for precision long-range shooting, retail value at several $1,000s. He set it on the mat. This was the 3rd test. The escalation was becoming obvious to the room, even if no one said so. Dahlia picked it up. She brought it to her eye, looked through the objective. 3 seconds. 4. She lowered it. "The elevation turret has drift," she said. "0.3 MOA to the left, approximately. Someone ran this recently and didn't re-zero when they brought it back." She set it on the mat. "It'll hold 0 at 500 meters and under. Beyond that, you'll be chasing your point of impact." Jasper's face went through something complicated. The Night Force NX8 was his personal optic. He'd had it in the store for 2 weeks, running it on his private rifle at the range. He had noticed a slight inconsistency at 600 meters and had been planning to address it. He had told no one this. The scope had never been handled by anyone else in the store. He looked at the optic. He looked at Dahlia. He did not speak. Floyd, who had been uncharacteristically quiet for 3 full minutes, picked up his phone and began typing. He was Googling something. Brick glanced at him. Floyd held up the screen. Ballistic drift tables. MOA correction charts. After 30 seconds of reading, he lowered the phone and did not show it to anyone. Dahlia turned from the scope and walked slowly along the front of the main case, looking through the glass at the handguns and the long guns beneath. She moved with unhurried attention, the way a person moves through a gallery, not browsing exactly, registering. Her eyes tracked the rows with a specific familiarity, the kind that comes not from ownership, but from proximity over time. She stopped at the Barrett M82A1. She didn't touch the glass. She just looked at it. Her right hand, hanging at her side, made a small, unconscious motion. The knuckles lifted slightly and came back down. barely perceptible. The way a hand moves towards something it already knows. Fern, still watching, pulled her phone from her apron pocket. She opened the camera app. She did not aim it aggressively. She simply held it, angled slightly toward the counter, and pressed record. It was instinct. The instinct of a woman who had spent 40 years watching situations tip and wanted to be ready when this one did. From the back of the store, the door to Silas Calloway's office was visible from the main floor. It was solid wood with a frosted glass panel. The light behind it had been on since before the store opened. The door had not opened all morning. Caleb Carson, seated in the chair near the entrance where his sister had gestured him, sat with his elbows on his knees, looking at his shoes. He was not performing patience. He was exercising it. There was a difference. Twice he had glanced toward the counter. Both times his sister had not looked back at him. Both times he had looked back at his shoes. Otis Garrett had been in the store since 8 a.m. He had used the indoor range in the back for 45 minutes, come out to refill his coffee twice, and by 9:30 was sitting at the range check-in desk with the particular ease of a man who intended to stay until someone asked him to leave. He was not drunk? Not yet, not exactly. But he was on the back slope of the previous evening and had not entirely cleared it. Otis had been listening to the conversation at the main counter with growing amusement. He pushed himself up from the desk and carried his coffee toward the main floor. "You know what I love about this?" he said to no one, to everyone. To everyone. He gestured loosely toward Dahlia. The confidence, the absolute, unshakable confidence. He looked at Brick. "Brick, you remember Danny Ferrara? Had that same energy. Came in here once, talking about subsonic 300 blackout suppressor." He laughed. Turns out he'd read about it in an online forum. "I remember Danny," Brick said. He was smiling again. The smile had evolved, still a performance, but thinner now, held up by stubbornness rather than genuineness. "Here's the thing." Otis set his coffee down at the end of the counter and leaned over. He was talking past Dahlia now, talking with her. "There's a difference between knowing about something and knowing something. Reading about combat shooting is not the same as..." He stopped because Dahlia Carson had turned and was looking at him directly. The quality of the attention in that look was not what he expected. It was not irritation. It was not embarrassment. It was not quite appraisal, not quite recognition, not quite warning. It was a look that belonged to someone who had, at some point in their life, learned to assess threats quickly. Otis laughed again, but it came out slightly differently. "I'm just saying." Dahlia returned her gaze to the counter. Caleb Carson had come partway out of his chair. His sister raised one hand, palm back toward him. A closed, deliberate gesture. "Stay." Caleb sat down immediately. No hesitation, no argument. Otis watched this, Floyd watched this, Brick watched this. None of them commented on it. But Derek Morales, by the computer terminal, had gone very still. Brick moved around the end of the counter. He had made a decision. The decision was that this had gone far enough, that the scene had run its natural course, and that the cleanest ending was a polite, firm redirection. He had used this ending 100 times. It worked because it gave everyone a way to exit without losing face. "Miss Carson," he said, a concession in itself, the use of her name. "I appreciate your knowledge. I do. But Recon Arms has a lot of serious customers on a Saturday morning, and I think..." "I know," Dahlia said. He blinked. "Know what? I know you've been busy." She looked at him with the same calm she'd had from the first moment. "How long did you serve?" Brick straightened. The question was not aggressive. That made it worse. 2 years. National Guard. "Okay," she said. 2 letters. Nothing else. Not dismissive. Not contemptuous. Just acknowledging. The way a person acknowledges what is true. Brick had served 2 years. Dahlia had said, "Okay." The math of it settled in the room with the weight of everything unsaid. From the back of the store, wood creaked. Silas Calloway's office door opened. He was 68 years old, and he moved like a man who had long since stopped preparing for it. Not his age, not his authority, not his history. He came through the door, calmly for someone who had learned to conserve energy and refuse the room. His hair was full of it. His hands were the hands of a former machine. Larger than life, slightly fingers from years of consistent. He wore no uniform. He never wore a uniform. He He didn't need to. He was halfway to the main counter, already planning to say something to Brick about the inventory report when his eyes found a woman standing at the far end of the counter. Silas Calloway stopped, not slowly, not hesitating. Stopped, 1 foot still a few inches above the floor, as if his nervous system had sent a command, and his body had simply halted. He looked at Dahlia Carson for 3 long seconds. She looked back at him. Brick, Silas said. His voice was quiet. The store went quiet with it. I'm handling a situation, Brick started. I see that. Silas walked to the counter. He did not look at Brick again. His eyes were on Dahlia. Go recount the 308 inventory. All of it? All of it. Again. A beat. Brick looked at the room, made a small sound that was meant to be casual, and walked toward the storage door. Floyd found somewhere else to be. Jasper disappeared behind the back counter. Silas stood across from Dahlia. 14 people in the store. None of them were looking at anything else. Carson, Silas said. His voice was barely above a conversational tone. Reaper 26. The name dropped into the room the way a stone drops into still water, not splashing, just sending rings outward in every direction. Dahlia was quiet. 1 second, 2, 3. Then she met his eyes and gave a single small nod. Silas reached into the back of the display case and placed both palms flat on the counter for a moment, steadying himself with the particular steadiness of a man absorbing news he had suspected but not confirmed. Then he straightened. Otis Garrett, who had been watching all of this from the end of the counter, put down his coffee and stepped toward the group, still carrying the bluster of the previous few minutes, still not understanding what had shifted in the room's center of gravity. What's going on? He said. He reached out and grabbed the sleeve of Dahlia's scrub top, not violently, but firmly. Hey, I'm talking here. The fabric pulled taut as he pulled her slightly off balance. What happened next was over before it registered. Dahlia's left hand came up and found his wrist. Her weight shifted, not away from him, but through him, redirecting his momentum along the axis he'd created. Otis's own grip became the problem. It pulled him forward and slightly down, into the edge of the glass counter rather than into Dahlia. He caught himself against the case with a sharp exhalation, wrist released, standing but unsteady. 4 seconds, beginning to end. No one in the room had moved. Several people had stopped breathing. In the process, Otis's grip had pulled Dahlia's left sleeve above the elbow. The tattoo was visible. It was not decorative. It was not the kind of tattoo that told a story someone chose to display. It was the kind of mark that meant something specific to people who knew what it meant. A geometric design, dense and precise, centered on a skull and combat headgear. Below it, in a clean utilitarian typeface, Delta Ipsilon Sigma Ipsilon. And below that, smaller. Reaper 26, Mosul, 2019. The Greek letters, the unit designation, the call sign. Ezra McBride stood up from his chair. The legs scraped the floor in the silence. His coffee mug was still in his hand, and he put it down on the nearest surface without looking at it. Holy cow, he said, barely above a whisper. That's a Delta Alpha. Silas Calloway, 68 years old, a Marside Master Sergeant, 12 years retired, a man who had not stood at attention for another human being since his own retirement ceremony, pulled his shoulders back, lifted his chin, and brought his right hand to the middle of his right. Full military salute, steady, precise, unhurried, the way it's supposed to be in a class. The store was absolutely silent. Fern Pierce and slightly unsteady behind the camera. Part 5. The salute held for 3 full seconds. In the military, a salute is not a prayer. It is not a formality provided by automatic, or a civilian shake hands. A salute, the real one rendered by someone who understands its weight, is a declaration. It says, I see what you are. I recognize what it calls you. Silas Calloway's death did not. 14 people in Recon witnessed it, not one of them spoke. The country music from the corner speaker moved into a new song at some point in the last few minutes, but no one was hearing it now. The sound existed in the room the way ambient noise exists in a dream, present but irrelevant, running beneath something that had taken up all available attention. Dahlia Carson looked at Silas for a minute, and she brought her own light, not to her brow. Her arm was still partially elevated toward the window. A fraction of the discipline she'd been suppressing for the last 4 minutes surfaced for one invisible second, like a structure showing itself in the water. Then she rolled over her sleeve. Silas grabbed his side. Otis Garrett was still leaning against the glass case, collecting herself, wrist held loosely in his other hand. He was looking at Silas. He had known Silas Calloway for 9 years. He'd been coming into recon with him since the beginning. Had shared coffee at this cafe, even Saturday mornings. He had never seen Silas salute anyone else. Silas, Otis said. His voice had lost its earlier bluster completely. It was just a man saying hello, asking a question he didn't know how to finish. Go sit down, Silas said. What? No edge. Just the voice of someone who had decided what the next 5 minutes would look like. Arranging the room for Otis went and sat down. His right eye had a look at the question. He was looking at Dahlia's sleeve, at the place where the tattoo had been visible, and the cover, with the expression of a man reorganizing a very large movie creation. His Iron Ranger experience gave him a particular frame of reference. He knew the Delta Force designation. He knew what the Great Rise was. He knew what Mosul in 2019 had looked like from the intelligence reports that came through his unit before his own retirement that same year. He knew the casualty figures from that deployment. He knew the specific terrible arithmetic of Reaper Team. He pressed his lips together and looked at the floor for a moment. Brick Tillman had stopped walking toward the storage room. He was standing in the doorway between the main floor and the back hallway, having heard the silence change quality in the way that silences sometimes do. He turned around. He saw Silas's expression. He saw the room. He looked at Dahlia's sleeve. He did not yet understand what he was looking at, but he understood that the explanation he'd built, the nurse doing research explanation, the sister helping with purchase explanation, the sealed record from malpractice litigation explanation, had just become structurally unsound. He could feel it the way you feel a chair begin to give before it actually breaks. Silas moved around the end of the counter and came to stand on the same side as Dahlia, which was a small thing and a significant thing. He faced the room. This woman, Silas said, is Combat Controller, 1st Special Forces, Operational Detachment Delta. He said it at normal volume. He did not announce it. He simply stated it the way you state a fact when you want a room to understand that what follows is not opinion. 11 years active, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, deployments to Kandahar, Fallujah, and Mosul. He paused. She has used every long-range rifle on this wall in field conditions, not at a range, not in training. Another pause. In combat, the word settled into the room and found its weight. Brick's hand was on the doorframe. He was gripping it in a way he probably wasn't aware of. Floyd Haskell had his phone face down on the counter. He had stopped Googling 3 minutes ago when the results had returned things he wasn't prepared to sit with. Silas, Brick said. His voice had changed register. Lower, less certain. How do you know? Because Marcus told me, Silas said. And then it came without explanation. It was not offered to the room. It was offered to Dahlia. He received it with a stillness that was entirely different from the stillness she'd been carrying for the last 4 minutes. That stillness had been dissipated. This was something older. Marcus, she said, without question. He used to stop in when he was in the area, Silas said. Before his last deployment, talked about his team. He looked at Dahlia directly. He talked about Reaper 2-6. Didn't use the name. Just said there was someone on the team who could put a round through a playing card at 900 meters in crosswind and then go write the after-action report for memory. Said that person was the reason 3 of the others came home. Deputy Derek Morales, by the computer terminal, had taken his hand off the keyboard. He was standing with both arms at his sides. He looked at the phone. Colonel Pierce's camera had been steady. She was very careful. He should have come home too, Dahlia said. It was the most she had said about anything that mattered since she was at the 5 words, delivered at the same volume as everything else she had said, and it realized everything. The ballistics questions, the composed responses to the monitor, the careful attention to details everyone else had missed, every piece of it Dahlia looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then she picked it up, turned it over, set it in her palm, and closed her fingers around it. Not gripping, just holding, the way you hold something you thought you would never see again. He left it with me 2 weeks before Mosul, Silas said. Said to give it to someone who'd earned the right to carry it. He looked at the coin in her closed hand. I've had it for 5 years. Caleb Carson, from his chair near the entrance, had his head down. His shoulders were moving in the controlled way of someone who was not going to do anything demonstrative in a room full of strangers, but was also not entirely in control of the pressure behind their ribs. Jasper Walsh, standing behind the back counter, said, "Ma'am." Just that. One word, offered into the air, like the first sentence of an apology he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Brick came back into the room. He walked slowly, the way a man walks when he's recalculating every step. He stopped at a reasonable distance from the counter, not approaching it, not retreating. He looked at Dahlia. He opened his mouth, and his first attempt produced nothing. He closed it, tried again. "I owe you," he stopped, started over. "I was completely wrong." He said it without the buffer of but, without qualification. The sentence stood alone. "About everything I assumed about why you were here, and about what I said to you." Dahlia looked at him for a moment, not coldly, not with satisfaction. The look was the same one she'd given him when he'd said he served 2 years. Direct, acknowledging what was true, not ornamenting it. "You didn't know," she said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It's not." That was the end of it. Not forgiveness delivered as a speech, not a moral delivered for the room, just an exchange between two people who both understood what had happened and what it meant. Brick nodded once, and there was something in the nod that was not comfortable. It was the nod of a man accepting something he would be thinking about for a while. Silas was watching all of this with the expression of a man who had spent a career assessing people. "Why don't you tell me what you actually need today?" he said to Dahlia. "Let's start there." Dahlia glanced toward Caleb, then back. "My brother is enlisting. He's been accepted to 38th Infantry, pending fitness certification. He's got his qualification testing in 6 weeks. She set her paper on the counter and the original paper she'd walked in with. "He's a decent shot. He needs to be better. I want to make sure he's working with the right equipment before he goes to basic, so the fundamentals are already in his hands." Silas picked up the paper. "Read it." His expression shifted into something more specific. Not surprise, but the focused attention of a professional being presented with a well-considered problem. "You want him running a precision platform before he ships. I want him understanding the difference between a tool and a weapon before anyone hands him one in the field," Dahlia said. "The equipment is secondary to that, but the equipment still matters." Silas nodded. "Jasper," he said, "take the young man over to the 300 blackout and the precision bolt section. Let him handle both. Don't pitch, just let him feel the difference." Jasper came around the counter without being asked twice. He crossed the floor to where Caleb was sitting and said, in a voice that had shed everything it had been carrying an hour ago, "Hey, want to come look at some rifles?" Caleb stood up and glanced at Dahlia. She gave a small nod, the same economy of gesture she'd used all morning, but warmer now, angled slightly differently. "Permission and something else. Go. This is what we came for." He followed Jasper. Gisela McBride waited until the young man and Jasper were across the room. Then he walked to the counter and stood next to Dahlia. He put his hand out. She shook it. "Thank you for your service," he said. It was the most inadequate phrase in the English language for what it was trying to hold, and everyone standing in earshot knew it. But Ezra said it with the weight of a man who had come home from deployments himself and understood the gap between the phrase and the reality, and who said it anyway because sometimes the inadequate thing is still the true thing. Dahlia nodded once. "Thank you for yours." The two of them stood there for a moment, not talking, not needing to, in the particular silence that exists between people who have looked at the same darkness from different angles. Floyd Haskell was sitting on the stool at the far end of the counter. He had not tried to add anything to any conversation in the last several minutes, which was unprecedented for a Saturday morning at Recon Arms. He was looking at his phone again, not Googling this time, reading. He had found the archived press coverage from the Mosul operation in 2019, the publicly available reports, the names that had been released, the description of what the team had extracted from a compromised insertion point under sustained fire. He put the phone face down again. He did not look up for a while. Deputy Derek Morales crossed from the computer terminal to the main counter. He stopped in front of Silas. "I ran her name," he said. Silas looked at him. "Federal seal. DOD access required." Derek paused. "I thought it was litigation." "Most people would," Silas said. Derek looked at Dahlia. "Ma'am, I apologize. I came to the wrong conclusion, and I acted on it." He straightened his posture. Not quite military bearing, but something adjacent to it. The instinct of a man who'd once trained for something larger than county law enforcement. "I'd like to make a different kind of inquiry, if that's appropriate. The county is building out a rapid response training program. We've been looking for someone qualified to consult on close-quarter judgment calls and long-range threat assessment." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a business card. Set it on the counter. "That's a standing offer, not a sales pitch." Dahlia looked at the card, did not pick it up immediately. "I'll think about it." "That's all I'd ask," Derek said. Fern Pierce lowered her phone. She walked to where Silas was standing and touched his arm lightly to get his attention. "I have 47 minutes, she said quietly. "A video." Silas looked at her phone. He was quiet for a moment. "Delete it," he said. Fern blinked. "Silas, It's her story," Silas said. "Not ours to circulate." Fern looked across the room at Dahlia, at the back of her, where she was standing at the counter looking at the rifle rack with Silas's earlier comment still settling between them. She looked at the sleeve that covered the tattoo. She thought about the way Dahlia had walked into this store at 9:17 a.m. in scrubs from a night shift, carrying a piece of paper with her brother's needs written on it, and had not explained herself once. Not one time. Had not said, "Do you know who I am?" Or "I've been places that would make your hair stand up," or any version of the 100 things a lesser person might have reached for. Fern opened her phone, deleted the video, put the phone back in her apron pocket. She picked up her clipboard and went back to inventory. Silas took Dahlia into the back display area where the precision rifles were kept, the ones not behind glass, the ones that required a particular kind of conversation to access. He pulled the Barrett MR-ED from its rack. 338 Lapua Magnum, multi-role adaptive design, a rifle that had been used by Special Operations Forces across 3 theaters. He set it on the long counter. Dahlia ran her hand down the stock. She was not performing anything now. There was no room to perform for. It was just her and Silas and the rifle and whatever the next thing was. "No charge for the consultation," Silas said. "I can pay for my time," Dahlia said. "I know you can." He looked at the rifle, then at her. "I'm not doing it because you can't. I'm doing it because Marcus would have wanted to be the one standing here talking to you, and he isn't. And this is the closest thing I've got." Dahlia was quiet for a moment. "He mentioned you," she said, "after Kandahar. He said if he ever left the service, he was going to come work in a gun shop in Texas." A small pause. "He said the owner was the best shooter he'd ever met outside his own team." Silas made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "He was being generous." "He wasn't," Dahlia said. "Marcus wasn't generous with compliments. He was accurate." Silas looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "He was." They stood there for a moment with the rifle between them and the weight of someone absent, pressing down on both of them in different ways. Grief among veterans has a particular character. It is not public. It does not narrate itself. It does not look for witnesses. It is simply there, like a piece of equipment you carry and do not put down. "You picked nursing," Silas said. It was not a question exactly. "I had to do something with my hands," Dahlia said. Silas nodded. He understood this completely. "The ICU," she said, "is the closest thing to a forward aid station that exists in a civilian context. You make decisions quickly. You don't always have everything you need. You work with what's in front of you." She looked at the Barrett. "The outcomes aren't always good, but you show up anyway." "That's all it ever was," Silas said. "That's all it ever was," she agreed. Dash across the store, Caleb was standing at the bolt-action counter with Jasper. The dynamic between them had changed entirely, and neither of them was pretending it hadn't. Jasper was demonstrating the difference in trigger pull between 2 precision rifles, a Ruger Precision and a Tikka T3. Letting Caleb feel both, explaining why a clean break mattered more than pull weight in the field. Caleb was listening with the kind of focus that only appears in people who understand that the information they're receiving will matter later. Not student focus, something more serious. Your sister taught you trigger discipline, Jasper said. It was not a question. He had watched Caleb handle the Ruger, and he had seen the index finger placement. Caleb looked at him. She taught me everything worth knowing, he said. He said it simply, without sentimentality. A statement of fact about the structure of his world. Jasper nodded. He stopped, chose the word carefully. She's something different. Yeah, Caleb said. She is. Jasper picked up the Tika again, showing Caleb the bolt operation. When you get to basic, he said, they're going to hand you an M4 and tell you it's the most important piece of equipment you own. They're right. Learn it the way she taught you. Everything else is secondary to knowing your weapon. Caleb absorbed this. Then, have you served? Jasper shook his head. No, almost enlisted out of high school. Didn't. A small pause. Days like today make me think about that differently. Brick Tillman had been standing near the storage room door for several minutes, not moving, not talking, in a state that a careful observer might have identified as genuine reckoning. The process of a man who had spent the morning building a structure that had just been demolished and was now surveying the rubble without the comfort of knowing whose fault it was. His instinct wanted to find a way to assign the collapse to external factors. The instinct was losing. He crossed the floor and stopped a few feet from where Caleb was standing. Hey, he said. Caleb looked at him. Your sister. He stopped, started again. She's something different, your sister. He put a hand on Caleb's shoulder, briefly, awkwardly, with the earnestness of a man who was not practiced at this. When you go in, remember what she is. Keep that in front of you when it gets hard. Caleb studied him for a moment. I will, he said. Brick nodded. He removed his hand and walked away faster than necessary, back toward the main counter, and picked up a clipboard and began doing something with inventory that did not require him to make eye contact with anyone. The conversation in the back display area had moved from the Barrett to the configuration Caleb would need, to the training regimen Dahlia had built for him over the previous 4 months, and finally to the question that had been sitting underneath the surface of the morning. You're in the transition program, Silas said. Dahlia paused. What do you know about that? Marcus mentioned it, before Mosul. Silas kept his voice level. He said the program was voluntary, post-mission civilian reintegration, 18 months. He said 2 people from the team were going in. He looked at her. He made it sound like a good thing. It is a good thing, Dahlia said. Mostly. Mostly, Silas repeated. She looked at the rifle. The hard part isn't the adjustment to civilian life, she said. The hard part is being in a room full of people who look at you and see a nurse and having to decide every single day whether to let them be wrong. She turned the Barrett slightly on the counter. Sometimes you let them be wrong because it doesn't matter. And sometimes you walk into a gun shop on a Saturday morning, Silas said. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one. A small, dry, tired expression that had things underneath it that the morning had not fully reached. Caleb enlisted without telling me first, she said. He's a good kid. He's smart, he's disciplined, he's got better instincts than I did at his age. A pause. I'm not worried about whether he'll make it. I'm worried about what making it costs. Silas was quiet for a moment. You can't carry that for him. I know, she said. I'm trying to give him the best possible equipment and get out of the way. That's all a good leader ever does, Silas said. Dahlia looked at him. Something passed across her face. Not surprise exactly, but the response of someone hearing a truth they had told themselves before and needed to hear from outside their own head. How is the nursing? Silas asked. Hard, she said. Right, necessary. She picked up the Barrett with both hands, testing its weight. There's a man in my ICU right now. Retired Army, 61 years old, double bypass last week. He doesn't talk much, stares at the ceiling mostly. But yesterday he looked at me and said, You move like you've been downrange. She set the rifle down. That's when I knew I wasn't hiding anything. I was just deciding who got to see it. Silas put his hand on the counter. He was looking at the far wall of the display room, at a framed photograph there, which Dahlia had not seen from the main floor. It showed a group of men in field gear, somewhere arid, late afternoon light. The kind of photograph that gets taken because someone understands the moment might not repeat. He crossed to the photograph and pointed to a figure near the left edge. Younger, leaner, a specific quality of alertness in the stance. Marcus, Silas said. Dahlia looked at the photograph for a long time. He came through here 8 months before Mosul, Silas said. Spent a Saturday afternoon in this back room. We talked for 3 hours. He wasn't worried. You know how he was. He didn't talk about things that way. But there was something he wanted to say before he went back. Silas looked at the photograph. He said the best thing about his team was that nobody on it needed to be the loudest person in the room to matter. Dahlia didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was the same quiet it had been all morning, but with something different underneath. He said that in the field, too. Used to drive the younger operators crazy. They'd want to debrief everything, rehash every decision. Marcus would just say, "You know what you did. The mission knows what you did. That's enough." "That's enough," Silas repeated. She turned from the photograph. The challenge coin was still in her jacket pocket. She'd put it there without discussing it, the way you secure something you do not want to have to explain. "What did he leave it with you for?" she asked. "Really?" Silas took a moment. He said, "If someone from the team ever comes through here, give it to whoever looks like they need to remember what they're worth." Dahlia was quiet. He knew, Silas said. He knew the transition was going to be hard. He was thinking ahead. He was always thinking ahead. He was, she said. It cost him sometimes. Going back to Mosul. She stopped. "You don't have to." "I know." She looked at the rifle rack. "He volunteered for the secondary extraction when the primary team got pinned. Nobody asked him to. He saw the gap in the cordon and he moved into it." She looked at her hands. "By the time I got to his position, the window had closed. I called in the air support. The extraction succeeded." A pause. Reaper 27 didn't come out. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of the main store. Jasper's voice explaining something. The click of a bolt action. The faint residue of country music from somewhere. "The mission succeeded," Silas said. "Yes," Dahlia said. "And you carried it anyway." Yes, Silas nodded once. He did not offer comfort. She had not asked for comfort. He simply acknowledged the weight of the thing she was carrying, the way one veteran acknowledges another's load, not by trying to lift it, just by seeing it clearly. Pitchuk. They came back to the main floor together. The atmosphere of Recon Arms at 10:53 a.m. on that Saturday was a different thing from what it had been 2 hours earlier. Not in any obvious, performative sense. The rifles were still on the walls, the coffee was still warm, the country music was still running its Saturday morning playlist. But the room had been reorganized at some invisible level. The people in it were arranged differently, not physically, but attitudinally. The way a room reorganizes around an event it has witnessed and cannot unwitness. Floyd Haskell stood up when Silas and Dahlia came through from the back. He looked at Dahlia and said without preamble or decoration, "I gave you wrong information. The 338 question. What you said was correct. He stopped. "I was wrong, and I said it with confidence, which makes it worse." Dahlia looked at him. "Caliber debates are never entirely settled," she said. "Mission profile determines the answer. You weren't wrong to have an opinion. I was wrong to state it like it was a fact and then condescend to the person questioning it," Floyd said. He met her eyes squarely. Something in him had shifted during the time she'd been in the back. The Googling, the reading, the silence. He looked like a man who had done an honest accounting and didn't like the balance. "That's the thing I'm apologizing for." Dahlia accepted this with a nod. Not a performance of acceptance, just the actual thing. Caleb came from the precision rifle section carrying a piece of paper where Jasper had written down 3 specific models with their specifications and a practice ammunition recommendation. He held it up. "Jasper thinks the Tikka in 308, for now, graduated to the 338 platform after 12 months, he said to Dahlia, "based on what I described for the training environment." Dahlia looked at the paper, looked at Jasper. Reasonable recommendation. Jasper, for the second time that morning, said just, "Ma'am." This time it carried something different than the first. The first had been astonishment, simple and unprocessed. This one had gratitude underneath it, for reasons he couldn't quite name but understood were connected to the fact that Dahlia Carson had not, at any point in this morning, turned any of this into a victory lap. She had answered questions. She had corrected what needed correcting. She had not made anyone watch her win. Silas went behind the main counter and pulled a floor model Tikka T3 TAC A1 out from the service side. He set it on the felt mat and then set beside it a box of Federal Gold Medal match in 308 Winchester. He looked at Caleb. "Your sister picked the right platform for where you're starting," he said. "This is where the conversation begins." The consultation that followed lasted 51 minutes. Silas ran it. He was methodical, specific, entirely professional, a man in his element, doing the thing he had opened this store to do. He walked Caleb through trigger mechanics, stock fit, scope mount fundamentals, and the specific discipline of a first-round hit at varying distances. He demonstrated twice and then watched Caleb demonstrate, correcting small things with the patience of a man who had trained a great number of people and understood that learning takes time and repetition and the absence of pressure. Dahlia watched from a few feet back. She spoke twice, once to clarify something Silas had said about wind hold, once to add a practical field note about how the information translated from range shooting to something with actual stakes. Both times she said what needed to be said and stopped. She did not take over. She did not redirect. This was Caleb's education, and she had done her part by bringing him here. Several of the regulars who had been in the store at 9:17 were still present at 11:44. Not all of them had stayed intentionally. This was their Saturday morning place, and they had nowhere pressing to be, but none of them had left either. They arranged themselves at a comfortable distance from the main consultation, giving it space, and were quiet in the particular way of people who understood they were in the presence of something worth being quiet for. Ezra McBride, at some point during the 51 minutes, came and stood at the edge of the group, not to participate, just to watch. His arms were crossed, his coffee long cold and forgotten, and he watched the way a man watches something that is reminding him of what matters. At the end of the consultation, Silas produced a receipt and handed it to Dahlia. She looked at it. It covered the ammunition, the scope mounting that Jasper had done during the session, and a small accessory kit. The Barrett MRAD was not on it. "The rifle," Dahlia started, "is on order," Silas said, "for you, when you're ready for it. No charge for the wait." She looked at him. "You'll come back for it," Silas said. It was not a question. "When you're ready." After a moment, she folded the receipt and put it in her pocket. Caleb was carrying the accessory bag and the ammunition box, talking with Jasper about bore cleaning protocols, when Derek Morales stopped Dahlia near the handgun case on her way to the door. "That offer stands," he said, nodding toward the business card still on the counter. "Whenever you want, no pressure." Dahlia picked up the card. She looked at it for a moment and then put it in her jacket pocket. "I'll be in touch," she said. Derek nodded. "Thank you." She had been called ma'am 3 times in the last hour by men who had spent the first part of the morning calling her sweetie and co-guy, and had stopped just short of little lady. The word meant something different each time someone said it. She received each version of it with the same even attention and moved on. Fern Pierce was at the register. She ran the transaction with the unhurried confidence of $40 at the same time. When she handed Dahlia the receipt, she held onto the edge of it for a half-second longer than was strictly necessary. "I deleted the video," Fern said. "Silas said to," Fern said. "But I want you to know, I would have anyway, after I thought about it." She released the receipt. "What you did in here today, the way you handled yourself, you didn't owe anyone in this room anything." "I know," Dahlia said. "I want you to know that I know that," Fern said. Dahlia looked at her for a moment with the most direct, unguarded expression she'd offered anyone all morning. Not warm exactly, but real, present. "Thank you, Fern," she said. It was the first time she'd used the woman's name. Fern straightened and went back to her inventory. Brick was waiting near the door. He had positioned himself there not to block it. He was standing to the side, making it clear the exit was entirely open, but simply to be there when she passed. Dahlia saw him and stopped. "I want to say something," Brick said. "That isn't an explanation." "All right," Dahlia said. "What I did this morning, the way I talked to you, the assumptions I made, that's on me. Not on your uniform, not on whatever I expected to see when you walked in. Me." He was looking at her, not past her, not at the floor. "I've been doing this job for 11 years, and I thought I knew what I was looking at. I didn't." A pause. "I won't do it again." Dahlia looked at him for a long moment. He was a specific kind of man, not cruel, not fundamentally dishonest, but certain in a way that had gone unexamined for long enough to calcify. The certainty had taken a significant strike this morning. It was not clear yet what would grow back in its place. That was his work to do, not hers. "You served," she said. 2 years. That matters. It's not the same thing, Brick said. No, she agreed. It's not, but it's something. She picked up the bag Caleb had set down to check his phone. The next time someone walks in here and knows things you don't expect them to know, start from curious instead of skeptical. That's all. Brick nodded once. He opened the door for her. Outside, the Fort Davis sun was doing what Texas sun does in the late morning, pressing down with the warm, purposeful weight of something that intends to stay. The parking lot of Recon Arms was half full, a scatter of trucks and SUVs, a couple of motorcycles at the far end. Caleb had gotten 3 steps ahead and was already at the passenger door, checking his phone. Dahlia stepped out and then let the door close behind her. The sound of the store disappeared. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, face up toward the sun, eyes closed. Not in any dramatic way, just a person who had been inside a complicated room for 2 hours and was now in the uncomplicated air. Then her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She looked at it, let it ring, put it back in her pocket. Caleb had looked up from his own phone. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. She started toward the car. "That was something in there," Caleb said. He fell into step beside her. "It was a Saturday morning," Dahlia said. He looked at her sideways. "You know that's not what I mean." She unlocked the car. They got in. The interior held a specific kind of quiet that develops between siblings when they know each other well enough to understand that some things don't need to be said immediately. Caleb set the accessory bag on the back seat, buckled in. "Are you sure I should do this?" Dahlia put both hands on the steering wheel but didn't start the engine. She looked through the windshield at the front of Recon Arms. The sign, the flags visible through the glass, the American flag in the window. "You asked me that 3 months ago," she said, "when you were deciding." "I know. I'm asking again. The answer is the same as it was then." She turned to look at him. "You are going to face things that have no correct response. You are going to be tired in ways you didn't know were possible. You're going to be in situations where the person next to you is the only reason you are still upright." She held his gaze. "And you are going to matter to that person in a way that nothing in civilian life quite replicates. That's real. That's worth something." A pause. "Whether it's worth what it costs, only you can know that. But you already made that decision. Now you just have to honor it." Caleb looked at her. He was 17 years old, and he was looking at his sister the way you look at someone when you understand for the first time that they are carrying something very large and have been carrying it for a long time and have never put it down. "I know you're not going to tell me what happened in Mosul," he said. "No." "Okay." He turned back to the windshield. "Is Marcus the reason you came home different?" Dahlia was quiet for a moment. "Marcus is part of it." She started the engine. "Part of coming home different is just coming home. You'll understand." The phone vibrated again. Same unknown number. She looked at it this time and did not decline the call immediately. She held the phone and looked at the screen for 3 full seconds. Then she set it face down on the center console. "Aren't you going to—" "Later," she said. She backed out of the parking space and pulled toward the lot exit. Inside Recon Arms, Silas Calloway had gone back to his office. He sat in the chair behind his desk, the same chair he'd been sitting in for 22 years, through a series of leases and one building renovation, and the death of his wife, and the growth of this store from a 1,500 square foot operation to the 4,000 square foot space it occupied now. The desk was covered in papers and part lists and a coffee mug that needed washing. He reached into his breast pocket and touched the spot where the challenge coin had been for 5 years. The pocket was empty. He pressed his palm flat against his chest for a moment. Then he stood up, went to the small safe in the corner, and opened it. From the back, behind the registration documents and the emergency cash, he retrieved a photograph. The same photograph that hung in the back display room, but a different print. A personal copy. He looked at the figure near the left edge. Marcus Reyes, Reaper 27. He set the photograph on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he went back to the main floor. The parking lot of Recon Arms was empty of Dahlia's car. The Saturday afternoon crowd was beginning to arrive. Different faces, different conversations, the regular second wave of weekend shooters and browsers, and men who came in to look at things they were thinking about buying, and usually didn't. Brick was behind the counter, processing a transaction. His voice was professional, courteous, entirely normal. But there was a quality underneath it, the quality of a man who was doing his job while something else ran in a different register behind it. Floyd Haskell had left. He would not come back the following Saturday, and when he came back the Saturday after that, he was quieter than he used to be. He started asking questions at the counter instead of answering them. Jasper was helping a young woman in her mid-20s choose between two pistol options. He was asking about her intended use, her hand size, her comfort with recoil, before making any recommendation. He was not performing expertise, he was gathering information. It was a small shift that the woman probably didn't notice, but Fern did, from behind the register, and she filed it without comment. Ezra McBride had left before Dahlia, but he had stopped at the register on his way out and said to Fern, in the quiet voice he used when he wanted something to be taken seriously, "That woman is going to matter to a lot of people. I don't know what she does next, but I'd pay attention." Fern had nodded. She had already reached that conclusion. Derek Morales came back at 2:15 p.m. He sat at the small table by the window, Ezra's former spot, and had a cup of coffee. He was in civilian clothes. He left his business card holder on the table, second card up, like a bookmark. The car had been driving for 40 minutes when Caleb fell asleep in the passenger seat, head against the window, the accessory bag wedged between his feet. He had the particular ability of someone young and physically active to go from conversation to sleep in the space of 2 minutes. Dahlia drove in the silence. The unknown number had called twice more. Both times she'd looked at the screen. Both times she'd set the phone down without answering. On the fifth call, she picked up. "Carson," she said. A pause on the other end. Then a voice she recognized. Not warmly, but completely. The kind of recognition that bypasses name and face and goes straight to something more primary. "We have a situation," the voice said. 360-second window. You're the closest person we trust." Dahlia's eyes stayed on the road. "Who else is on this?" she said. "Nobody yet. We need a primary first." Outside the passenger window, the Texas landscape moved past in the flat, unhurried way of the high desert. Mesquite and caliche and sky that went on longer than seemed reasonable. "I'm not active," she said. "We know," the voice said. "We're asking anyway." Caleb shifted in his seat, still asleep. Dahlia looked at the road. She thought about the challenge coin in her jacket pocket. She thought about a photograph in a back room, a man near the left edge, a unit that had numbered 8 and had come home with 5. She thought about what it cost and what it meant and the things Silas had said. That's all it ever was, and what she had answered. "Send me the file," she said. "I'll call you back in 20 minutes. She ended the call. She drove. The phone buzzed once. A file notification, encrypted, the kind that didn't leave a trail. She did not open it yet. She drove for another mile, and then she pulled over at a rest stop and sat with the engine idling. Caleb woke up at the sound of gravel under the tires. "We stopping?" he said, still half asleep. "1 minute," Dahlia said. She opened the file. She read. Caleb watched her face. He had spent 17 years learning to read his sister's expressions, which was a project she had made difficult by keeping most of them below the surface. But he had learned a few of the tells, the slight tightening of the corner of the jaw, the way her eyes went still when the processing something fast, the particular quality of quiet that preceded a decision. He saw all 3. "Dahlia," he said. "I'm fine," she said. "That's it. Give me a minute, Caleb." He gave her the minute. She read to the end of the file. She locked the phone and set it in her lap and looked through the windshield at the rest stop. A picnic table, a dumpster, a sign giving the distance to the next town. "I might need to make a trip," she said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "How long? I don't know yet. But you're going." Dahlia looked at him. He was 17, and he was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the gun store, with the eyes of someone who had understood, perhaps before today, and certainly after it, what his sister actually was, and what that meant for the shape of their life together. "I don't know yet," she said again. But they both heard the difference between "I don't know" and "no." She started the engine. "Nobody in that store knew," Caleb said, as they pulled back onto the road. "When you walked in, not one of them." "That was the point," Dahlia said. "How do you do that?" he said. "Walk into a room and just not explain yourself." Dahlia was quiet for a moment. The road stretched out ahead of them, and the sun was at the angle that meant early afternoon, and the high desert was doing its particular thing with the light, making everything look simultaneously close and very far away. You learn, she said, that the people who need to know already know, and the people who don't know yet, they'll figure it out when it matters. She glanced at him. The rest of the time, you just do the work. Caleb looked out the window. He turned the Tika spec sheet over in his hands. He was going to be a soldier. His sister had been something harder to name, in a unit with a designation most people would never hear, and she had done the work for 11 years and carried it home in a sealed federal record and a tattoo on her left arm and a coin that had belonged to someone who didn't come back. He put the spec sheet in the bag. "The work," he said. "The work," she said. Issued. Back at Recon Arms, Silas Calloway stood at the front window for a moment in the mid-afternoon light. The Saturday crowd was in full effect now. The store was busy, voices overlapping, the comfortable commerce of people who knew what they wanted. Brick was handling 2 customers at once, doing it well, moving between them without condescension, asking questions before giving answers. Something had changed in the way Brick moved through the store. Silas had been watching for it, and it was there. Not dramatic, not announced, but present. The particular adjustment of a man who had bumped into his own blind spot and was in the process of mapping the territory around it. Fern came to stand beside Silas at the window. "You think she'll be back for the rifle?" Fern asked. Silas looked at the parking lot, at the empty space where Dahlia's car had been. "Yes," he said. "When?" "When the next thing is finished," he said. "Or the one after that." Fern considered this. "The coin," she said. "You'd had it a long time. 5 years. Was it hard to give away?" Silas thought about Marcus Reyes in the back room, talking for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon about his team. About what they were and what they owed each other, and what it meant to be the kind of soldier who didn't need anyone in the room to know how good they were. "No," Silas said. "That's what he left it for." He turned from the window and walked back into the store. In his breast pocket, where the coin had been, there was only the clean weight of an empty space that had been used well and handed on to the person who needed it next. Outside, the afternoon continued its business in the way Texas afternoons do, unhurried, enormous, and largely indifferent to the specific dramas of the people moving through it. The sign above Recon Arms moved slightly in a wind that smelled of cedar and dry earth. The American flags in the window caught the light, and somewhere on a highway heading south, a phone on a center console showed an encrypted file, a request, and a set of coordinates that were waiting for someone who didn't need to explain herself to anyone in a room to be exactly the right person for what came next. "Welcome back, Reaper,"